Okay, so let's get into this. We have a really fascinating set of sources today, and they all focus on one single event, Donald Trump's meeting with President Zelensky at Mar-a-Lago.
Right. And what's so interesting is the lens they use. This isn't your typical political analysis.
Not at all. It's analyzed as a deliberate masterclass in power strategy. And the core question our sources pose is, I think, a pretty unsettling one for all of us.
It is. The question is what happens, not just globally, but at home, when a leader stops even pretending to serve truth and starts openly feeding on it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so critical. We are often told to view Donald Trump's actions as, chaotic or impulsive.
Or just bad press, right?
Yeah.
A gaffe. But our sources today insist that's a complete misreading.
Yeah.
They argue the real danger is in seeing the method in the madness.
The method?
Yes. They frame that Mar-a-Lago meeting as a very deliberate window into a governing logic, one that's rooted in, well, transactional cruelty, manipulation, and this core belief that norms and morals are just obstacles.
Obstacles to be managed.
Or just removed entirely. Which is why, to really get what's happening, we have to use a very specific, almost cold philosophical lens.
And that's the Machiavellian lens. This entire analysis is filtered through the principles of Niccolo Machiavelli.
Precisely. Machiavelli's great insight was that the most dangerous ruler isn't the most predictable one. The really dangerous one, he warned, is the one who appears harmless while they're actually practicing domination.
A master of appearance.
A master of appearance. So our mission today is to treat Donald Trump's actions in that meeting as a case study. We have to move past the idea that any of it was an accident.
So we're really mapping out the choreography of power here. We're going to show how the setting he chose, the specific language he used, and the kind of chilling sequencing of his calls were all calculated.
They were all designed to communicate hierarchy and control, not just to Zelensky, but to the entire world.
So let's start with where it all happened, the geography of power, the choice of Mar-a-Lago itself.
Absolutely. Because for Machiavelli, the setting is where the strategic communication always begins.
Right. So the first thing the sources just hammer home is the location. He didn't pick a neutral state environment.
No. He skips the White House. He skips the Oval Office, any formal diplomatic space. Places that imply a certain protocol, a meeting of equals.
Instead, he chooses his private dining room at his own resort.
And that choice is just loaded with meaning. For Machiavelli, power is theater, and the theater begins with the venue. Choosing a private commercial property over the actual seat of U.S. government that sends a message before anyone even shakes hands.
What's the message?
The message is, this is not a formal state visit. This is a private audience. You are coming into my world on my terms.
And a dining room, fundamentally, is a place of, what, consumption? Appetite? It has a built-in hierarchy, right? There's a host, there are guests, there are servants.
It's domestic. It's personal. And it demands that the guest submits to the host's rules. It has none of the neutrality of a conference room.
So imagine you're a wartime president. Your country is literally being shelled. Your people are freezing. And you're being received in this opulent dining room.
The silent message is overwhelming. It's, this is my house, my rules, my moment of judgment. Instantly, Zelensky is cast not as an equal head of state, but as a petitioner.
A petitioner who has to come to the host's territory and essentially ask for help.
And that immediately establishes an unequal power dynamic. It strips away the parity that's essential for any fair negotiation. The coercion begins before the conversation even does.
You said coercion. That brings us to the next step, which really formalized this whole power play, the removal of witnesses.
This is pure textbook Machiavellian strategy. Control the information flow. A smart ruler, he would say, never allows uncontrolled observers, especially the press, to be there when real power is being exerted.
Why not?
Because public accountability is a weakness if you're trying to manipulate someone. If the truth is recorded, you lose the ability to redefine what happened later.
And the sources detail this very specific, almost taunting exchange when he turns to the reporters. He says, "You want some food?"
Yeah, and the removal wasn't subtle. It wasn't, "Gentlemen, we need the room." It was an act of public humiliation. But the line he used to dismiss them, that's maybe the most revealing part of the whole thing.
He says, "You want some food? Or are you going to call it a bribe?"
Yes. Let's just pause on that line for a second. Our sources call it a confession disguised as mockery. That's a powerful idea.
It really is. What's the mechanism there? Why is that line so effective?
It's psychological projection. He's literally confessing his own worldview while at the same time making the person asking the question, the journalist, seem paranoid for even thinking it.
He's flipping it on them.
Completely. He's taking a normal, ethical interaction offering lunch and framing it as a potential bribe. In doing that, he's not defending himself. He's broadcasting his core belief that everything is a transaction.
That integrity is just for show.
Right, that ethics are just, annoying obstacles to getting a deal done. He assumes corruption is the default setting because, in his mind, that's just how power works.
So it's not him saying, I'm innocent. It's him saying, your expectation of innocence is laughable.
Exactly. Machiavelli told rulers to appear virtuous. Donald Trump takes it a step further. He openly mocks the very need for virtue. And by doing that, he neutralizes the criticism before it can even land.
The press are marginalized. The idea of accountability is made to look foolish.
The message is clear. The only thing that matters here is my personal power. And then he says the words.
Take them outside.
And just like that, independent scrutiny leaves the room. And the stage is set for what came next. Pressure, testing, and manipulation. But it's important to remember, not everyone left.
No. The neutral observers, the press, were gone. But according to the reports, Donald Trump was still flanked by figures. Figures seen as very sympathetic to Russian interests.
Or, at the very least, completely loyal to Donald Trump personally, above any foreign policy objective.
And Machiavelli wrote that you see a ruler's true alliances not in their speeches, but in who is with them in private.
And the people who remained weren't there to give balanced advice. They were there to enforce the power dynamic. Their loyalty was to being close to power, not to democratic norms.
So with the press gone and the loyalists in place,
he was free to speak his mind, not as one head of state to another, but as a man sizing up another man, testing him for compliance. It created this very intimate, but also completely exposed environment for Zelensky.
Okay, so the stage is set, the witnesses are gone. The next strategic move is all about language. And this is where the manipulation becomes, I think, truly chilling, the moral inversion.
Yes. After the meeting, when Donald Trump was talking to reporters, they asked him about Russia's escalating attacks on Ukrainian civilians.
Specifically targeting energy infrastructure in the middle of winter. Clearly a war crime.
A brutal tactic.
Yeah.
But his response wasn't to condemn it.
No. Instead, he created what the sources call a chilling symmetry. He assigned equal responsibility.
His line was, I think Ukraine has made some very strong attacks also. Now, we have to really break that down. This isn't a balanced, neutral statement. The sources are clear. This is moral inversion.
Let's focus on that difference. Neutrality versus inversion. What does that mean in practice?
Well, neutrality would be staying out of it, right? But inversion is an active, deliberate act of rhetorical sabotage. In any just conflict, there's a clear moral line between an invader and a defender.
An aggressor and a victim.
Exactly. Inversion works to erase that line. If you can blur the aggressor, Russia, targeting civilians to cause suffering with the victim who is fighting for survival, if you can make them seem equally responsible,
then accountability just evaporates.
it completely dissolves. The war is no longer a clear case of illegal aggression. It just becomes complex.
Right.
A messy fight between neighbors. And if it's complex, then justice isn't mandatory anymore. It's negotiable.
So you minimize Russia's actions by creating this false equivalence with Ukraine's defense. You dilute the crime.
You dilute it, you contextualize it, you frame it as a conflict between two willing parties. And that phrasing is so powerful.
Two willing countries.
Yes, because it implies both sides want the war to end and that they both have an equal moral stake in continuing it.
Which is a lie.
That's a fundamental lie. And Machiavelli was adamant. Control the language before you control anything else. The reality gap here is massive. Ukraine wants survival. Russia wants domination. Equating those two desires erases the crime itself.
And the strategic goal is to build a public narrative that makes surrender seem acceptable.
That's the end game. If both sides are equally at fault for this complex situation, then forcing Ukraine to give up territory can be sold as pragmatic, as realistic.
It's no longer a betrayal, it's a solution.
One source calls it necessary cruelty disguised as peace. It's a peace that comes entirely at the victim's expense, but it's presented as a win for global stability. Donald Trump just calls it a deal.
This all gets wrapped up in what the sources call his masterpiece phrase, when he described the war as pretty complex, but not that complex.
That phrase is a work of genius. In a purely manipulative sense, it's a triple threat.
Okay, what's the first manipulation?
First, it's flattery for himself. It says, I understand this better than all you experts. It establishes his authority, his superior grasp of the situation.
Right. And the second is that it dismisses all the actual expert analysis.
Yes, it's a dismissal. Don't overthink it. It tells the public to ignore history, international law, all the nuance. It reduces a massive, tragic conflict to a simple problem that only he can solve with a simple, brutal solution.
And the third, manipulation.
It prepares the ground for that brutal solution. Machiavelli warned that complexity invites debate, and debate paralyzes action. So what do? You collapse the complexity into inevitability.
You make it seem simple.
And if the problem is not that complex, then anyone who opposes the simple solution, even if it's unjust, looks unreasonable. They look like they're the ones getting in the way of peace.
So the message becomes, stop fighting the inevitable. This is the only way.
Exactly. The illusion of simplicity is how you pave the road to submission.
Okay, so the setting established the hierarchy, the language inverted the morality. Now, let's get to the signaling. This whole performance wasn't just for Zelensky. It was a broadcast to the world.
A broadcast to Moscow, to Kiev, to NATO. And the sequencing of his phone calls is maybe the most revealing move of all.
After the meeting, Donald Trump announced he was going to call President Putin again.
Right. And the sources stress the order of operations here. He spoke with Putin before he met with Zelensky, and then he planned to call him again immediately after.
Putin, then Zelensky, then Putin again. That's not a schedule, that's a hierarchy.
It's a statement of priorities. It positions Russia as the primary partner in this negotiation. Ukraine is demoted to a secondary variable. A problem to be discussed with Moscow, not an equal party.
It's strategic isolation.
Profoundly so. Machiavelli's advice was clear. When you're negotiating between two rivals, never appear more dependent on one than the other. That's a sign of weakness.
But Donald Trump did the exact opposite.
He broadcast his alignment with the aggressor. The signal to Europe, to NATO, was unmistakable. The center of gravity has shifted. The U.S. is no longer Ukraine's unconditional ally. It's a broker now, and its priorities are flexible.
And that idea of flexibility is key, isn't it? It leads right to this idea of deadlines, or the lack thereof.
Yes. For years, Donald Trump's line was that he could end the war in 24 hours. It was a performance of strength, of decisiveness.
But when he was pressed on it after this meeting, he just walked it back.
Completely. He retreated into, I don't have deadlines. I'm not a deadline guy. And this is pure Machiavellianism. For Machiavelli, consistency doesn't matter if you still have power. Broken promises are irrelevant.
So what's the strategic value in getting rid of deadlines? It seems like it would just drag things out.
It's the ultimate form of leverage. Without a deadline, the war stops being a tragedy that needs to be solved and becomes a political tool that can be used indefinitely. Well, he can shift blame whenever he wants. He can apply pressure on Ukraine by extending negotiations. He keeps them in this state of suspended animation, always hoping for an American deal, but never getting the security they need to actually win. The war becomes his asset.
It feeds right back into that transactional mindset.
Absolutely. The sources talk about his obsession with deals, money, leverage. In that worldview, a nation's sovereignty is just a bargaining chip. Human lives are just line items on a spreadsheet.
And even destruction can be seen as an opportunity, a distressed asset.
Precisely. So when he talks about Ukraine's great wealth and the economic benefits that could come from giving up land, he's not talking like a statesman. He's talking like a real estate developer looking at a property to be carved up.
He's reducing a nation's fight for survival to a prospectus.
And that's a classic Machiavellian danger. A ruler who profits from instability has no incentive to solve it fairly. If Ukraine is broken up and its assets are sold off, Donald Trump can call that a successful deal, even if the nation itself ceases to exist in a meaningful way.
And the final piece of this transactional puzzle was his dismissal of security guarantees for Ukraine. He just called the idea dumb.
Which is terrifying. Security guarantees are the absolute core of any real peace deal. It's how the weaker party knows they won't be attacked again the moment the ink is dry.
So what does refusing them signal?
Machiavelli taught that a ruler who offers peace without protection is actually offering surrender. Donald Trump's refusal to even discuss guarantees suggests that capitulation is the desired outcome. He wants a clean deal, and a clean deal is easier when one side is left completely vulnerable.
He also shifted the burden, didn't he? He kept emphasizing that Europe would have to be involved.
Classic burden shifting. And it's a very sophisticated move. It does two things at once. First, it distances the U.S. from any binding commitment. If the deal fails, he can blame Europe.
And if it succeeds?
He takes all the credit. It's maximum political gain with minimum strategic risk. But the deeper implication is even more serious.
Which?
The U.S. fundamentally repositions itself.
It's no longer the guarantor of the international order. It's just a broker, indifferent to the moral outcome. And neutrality in the face of aggression is alignment with the aggressor.
So we've covered the setting, the language, the signaling. Now we have to look at the psychological impact of all this, because this wasn't just a meeting. It was a form of psychological warfare.
And it was designed to set a really dangerous authoritarian precedent. The first thing we have to talk about is what the sources call the disappearance of shame.
What do they mean by that?
Shame isn't about morality, really. It's about the fear of consequences. It's the little voice that stops you from doing something outrageous because you're worried about what people will think.
The internal brake.
The internal brake. When a leader realizes they can act without consequence, that brake disappears. And Donald Trump did all of this, expelled the press, mocked ethics, aligned with an aggressor out in the open, and politically, nothing happened to him.
So that lack of consequence is like fuel.
It's pure accelerant. Machiavelli knew that a ruler becomes most dangerous when they realize they can survive dishonor. After that point, reputation doesn't matter anymore. Only control does. The fact that he was so public about it shows he believes resistance is futile.
And this all feeds back into that strategic isolation of Ukraine we were talking about, making their defeat seem inevitable.
Yes. He's not just announcing an abandonment. That would be too shocking. Instead, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. He uses softening language, right? Europe will be involved. There will be economic benefits.
It's calculated ambiguity.
Exactly. And Machiavelli would have admired its cynical brilliance. It ensures that when Ukraine is eventually forced to concede, it doesn't look like a betrayal. It just looks like realism, a bitter pill everyone has to swallow.
And the mechanism for all this is the degradation of language, those phrases we keep coming back to.
Two willing parties, not that complex, no deadlines.
Economic benefits.
Each one drains a little more moral clarity from the situation. And when words lose their meaning, truth loses its power. He knows that if you can get people to stop calling an invasion, then eventually an occupation can just be called a negotiation. It's about creating moral exhaustion.
And this has a conditioning effect on the public back home, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. If you hear over and over again that both sides are responsible, your initial sense of outrage just fades.
And that outrage is the fuel for democratic resistance.
It is. Machiavelli warned about this. You can train a population to accept its own moral weakening if you frame it as realism. Donald Trump is training the public to lower its expectations of justice. Surrender becomes the adult choice. Fighting for what's right becomes childish and impractical.
And this whole performance was watched around the world. The global signal must have been enormous.
Every authoritarian regime was watching. China, Iran, North Korea. And the lesson they learned was simple and unambiguous.
What was the lesson?
That aggression will be negotiated, not punished. That allies will be pressured, not protected. That power respects only power, not treaties or principles. Machiavelli warned that weakness invites imitation. This is how regional conflicts go global.
The sources make a really sharp distinction here between convenience and courage. The promise Donald Trump offers is a convenient one, right? I will end the war. A quick, easy solution.
It's a seductive lie, the promise of finality. Machiavelli said rulers use this lie to get people to avoid harder but more necessary choices.
And what are the harder choices?
Supporting Ukraine decisively, maintaining moral clarity even when it's costly, imposing real consequences on aggression. These things require courage. Donald Trump offers convenience instead.
But convenience always has a price.
Always. And you always pay it later, in lives, in instability, and lost credibility. As Machiavelli believed, a ruler who chooses convenience over principle will, in the end, lose both.
And the final warning in all of our source material is that this isn't just about foreign policy. This is a domestic precedent.
That is the essential takeaway. The methods you test abroad, you always bring them home.
So if he can expel the press, mock accountability, and rewrite reality when it comes to a war,
he can do the exact same thing when it comes to elections, laws, and domestic dissent. In that sense, Ukraine isn't just a foreign policy issue. It's a testing ground for a method of power that can be applied anywhere.
And while all of this was happening inside, there was this small act of defiance just outside the gates.
That's right. The sources mentioned the pro-Ukraine protesters outside Mar-a-Lago. A small crowd, but a determined one. They represent that moral resistance that refuses to be silenced.
And Donald Trump's reaction?
He ignored them. And Machiavelli understood that ignoring moral resistance is the first step toward crushing it. If you can pretend it doesn't exist, you're establishing that it has no power.
So if we pull it all together, the big picture here is that the Mar-a-Lago meeting wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a scandal.
It was a rehearsal, a method of power being tested, being refined for much broader use.
And the consequences, if this path continues, seem pretty clear.
They are. Ukraine loses territory, Russia consolidates its power, American moral authority collapses, and autocrats everywhere are emboldened. The world becomes a much more dangerous place. Peace built on submission is just an intermission before the next war.
It seems like the greatest danger isn't just evil intention, but the belief that you can manage evil without becoming part of it. The idea that Donald Trump thinks he can manage Putin.
That strategic hubris is always self-defeating. The playbook is ancient.
Yeah.
You reframe the crime, you pressure the victim, and you convince everyone that surrender is the only realistic option.
Which brings us to the final question, a question that moves us away from theory and strategy to the raw human impact. When power stops pretending to stand for truth, when peace just becomes another word for surrender, and when nations are treated like bargaining chips. Who pays the price for that convenience?
The answer is never the men in the dining rooms.
It's the people in the cold, whose lives and whose country were just erased from the balance sheet.